The island of Malta is a country located south of Italy in the Mediterranean Sea. On the surface, this island seems pretty normal. It has a population of over 500,000, and it's a pretty popular destination for tourists. But while it may look beautiful on the surface, there are stories of something going on in these strange and ancient catacombs beneath the island. Today, I'm going to explain some of these stories and then a real missing persons case concerning a person who was found with all his vital organs removed. And yes, he was going to visit the catacombs in Malta when that happened. So please subscribe if you're new, because if you're finding this video, my channel is super tiny and you'll probably never find it again if you don't subscribe. But let's get into it. So historians believe that Malta was first settled back in around 5900 BC. There's a good deal of debate about this though, as there have been 2 human teeth found on Malta that were dated to much earlier, more like 16,000 BC, but that hasn't been confirmed. The teeth also seem consistent with Neanderthal teeth, which could mean Neanderthals existed on Malta long after archaeologists believed they went extinct. But the research into carbon dating the teeth isn't published, so we don't know for sure. The fact that it's not published is weird to say the least. Another strange part of the timeline of Malta is that it appears that the Maltese people didn't really do much of anything on the island for like 1,000 or so years, and then suddenly they built this. This structure is called Gigantea, and it is one of the oldest freestanding structures in the entire world. Based off of the structures on Malta, it seems like the Maltese didn't really build much of anything out of stone, and then just started moving these nearly 50-ton stones into place and built a 3-story temple in 3600 BC, which, yeah, that brings up some questions as to why they didn't build their homes out of stone and then, just started this massive project out of nowhere. I guess it was a temple, right? So you'd use materials that were like a little bit more special than a regular person's home, but it appears that Gigantea was their first temple, and it's quite the accomplishment considering they didn't show any prior experience with working with stone. There were also charred animal bones found at the temple, which leads to the theory that the Maltese were sacrificing animals at the temple, or maybe just grilling on the Barbie. Either one. But let's change our focus to the Malta Catacombs. In 1902, some workers were building underground water tanks for a housing development here in southern Malta. While digging into the ground, they broke through the roof of something and discovered what came to be known as the Halsaflini Hypogeum. These catacombs date back to around 3000 BCE, making them the oldest catacombs on Malta. Technically, they aren't even considered catacombs because they're from before when the Roman Empire was on Malta, and also more than 2 millennia older than the Roman people in general. But just because it's classified as a hypogeum or underground chamber doesn't mean Halsaflini doesn't have bones. In fact, it has approximately 7,000 or more people buried within the confines of the underground labyrinth. It's theorized that there was a shrine on the surface which allowed access into the catacombs, but it fell into disrepair for some reason, causing the catacombs to be sealed off for thousands of years. A man named Emmanuel Magri was put in charge of excavating and studying the hypogeum. Magri started the excavation in late 1903 and continued for a few years. And while unfortunately he didn't really do a great job of documenting and preserving everything, he did have a report he was working on all of his findings until March 29th, 1907, when he unexpectedly and suddenly died. His report was never published. And if you're wondering why he died and if it was while in the hypogeum, the first answer is I couldn't really find any sources that said how he died. It was just sudden. Number 2, no, he wasn't in the hypogeum, but that would have been crazy. Can you imagine if he was in the hypogeum and then he died? Oh my gosh, that would have been so cool. Anyway, there are 3 separate levels to the underground structure carved into the limestone, the first of which contains a lot of smaller rooms, including burial rooms. Some of the first 2 levels would have had holes reaching to the surface to let in light. However, all of them were sealed. One level deeper is the level with some of the most notable rooms, and also probably the 2 strangest rooms in all of the hypogeum. The first of these is known as the Oracle Room, and it has a heavily decorated ceiling, but the strangest part about this room is that it makes a very loud acoustic resonance when you speak inside of it, which carries throughout the rest of the hypogeum. The final room is known as the Holy of Holies, and the room is oriented towards the winter solstice based off of its skylights. What's strange is the 3rd and deepest level isn't very open to the public, and the Maltese organization which runs the hypogeum says there isn't anything of note on that layer. Now that you understand what the hypogeum or catacomb structure is, let's talk about the stories. There were skulls found in the hypogeum. Obviously, that makes sense because people were buried there, but what doesn't make sense is some of the shapes of the skulls. Some of the skulls found within the hypogeum were really long. They also didn't show signs of artificial lengthening, which means that most likely these people, if they were people, somehow had long skulls naturally. A lot of people claim that this means that they aren't humans, maybe super secret aliens, I don't know. That's what some people think. Anyway, there was a tiny area in Peru where people had naturally elongated skulls. But that's Peru in South America versus a country in the Mediterranean. Google Maps, how far away are those two? So if these people in Peru and the people on Malta were part of the same group, how did one group end up in the hypogeum when the other one ended up in a tiny graveyard in Peru? I don't really think I even have to add anything to that. Only those people in both those areas had those skulls, and it's not artificial lengthening? Yeah, let me know in the comments, I guess. The next two stories are the ones where this gets a lot scarier, though. The first of the two is about a group of a couple dozen Maltese elementary schoolers and their school teacher. This group entered the hypogeum for a school trip back in 1940, but as they were entering a burial chamber deep within the catacombs, the entrance to the chamber collapsed, leaving them somewhere within the maze. A National Geographic magazine piece in August of 1940 explained that when the search teams looked for the class, quote, for weeks, they heard wailing and screaming from underground, but numerous excavations and searching parties brought no trace. So based on that story, it's haunted and there's aliens or whatever, and they ate the kids or something. I don't know. Well, I guess National Geographic wasn't as reputable in 1940 or something, because as far as we know, there were no local newspapers or anything actually talking about missing students, but it is a cool story. So thanks National Geographic for making stuff up. That's probably fake. It's probably a fake story. Now, the second story allegedly comes from a British embassy worker named Lewis Jessup, also during the 1940s. She was exploring the lowest level of the catacombs when she stumbled across a cliff face and almost fell in. She backed away from the precipice, but then noticed another tunnel on the other side of the pit. Suddenly, multiple tall humanoid beings covered in white fur walked out of the opposite tunnel. They began to raise their hands in her direction, facing their palms at her. Then a gust of wind knocked her candle out even though she was underground, and she ran back the way she came and fled the hypogeum. But is this story true? Probably not. There aren't actually records of any person named Lewis Jessup having existed, so you could say it was a cover-up or whatever, blah blah blah, aliens, whatever. Neither of these stories appear to be real, but they are pretty cool. Now the skulls, on the other hand, that is crazy to me. I have no idea about that, but what we really need to talk about is what happened to Mike Mansholt in the Malta Catacombs in 2016. Mike Mansholt was a 17-year-old German teenager. He was visiting Malta during July of 2016 when the incident occurred. On the morning of July 18th, Mike checked out of his hotel, took a rented mountain bike and a GoPro, and set off towards the Rabat Catacombs, also known as St. Paul's Catacombs. These catacombs are different from the House of Flini because they are built by the Romans. However, these catacombs are much more open to the public and people are allowed to explore them easily. They also happen to be the largest catacombs on the entire island. After he set off towards the catacombs, though, Mike was never seen alive again. The day after he had checked out of his hotel, the bike rental shop Mike had acquired his mountain bike from reported it missing, and from there they called the Maltese authorities. The situation didn't really go anywhere for a few days more though, until a plane left Malta and headed back towards Germany. One of the passengers of this flight was supposed to be Mike, but he was still missing. Mike's parents immediately flew out to Malta to look for their son, who by this point hadn't made contact with anyone in 4 days. The search started from there, but after an apparently anonymous tip told the Maltese authorities the location of the body, Mike was finally discovered at the bottom of a set of cliffs, approximately 5 miles from the catacombs. The authorities claimed he had fallen around 100 feet off of the cliff on his bike and died. And it would be a very sad and unfortunate accident if Mike had died in that way. Because there were a lot of strange circumstances surrounding his death. Firstly, despite the fact that the Maltese authorities had reported Mike had multiple fractures in his back from the fall, he had no such fractures. In fact, none of his bones were broken, which is not impossible from a fall of that height, but it's very unlikely. However, Mike didn't have any abrasions from falling that distance either. His bike was also in normal condition, which seems impossible if it had fallen that far. So why did the Maltese government say that he had fallen off this cliff 100 feet and died from that? I guess they just said that he did because it doesn't really seem like he did. But then we get to the weirdest part. Mike Mansholt was missing his vital organs. The only organs left in his body were his left kidney, spleen, and large intestine. Everything else, including his brain, were missing. The Maltese authorities claimed that this was because of rodents, like eating them, but there were only minor bite marks on his neck and nowhere else. Mike's backpack and belongings were not returned to his parents by the authorities, who claimed that they had not been there or been stolen. And the Maltese authorities did not give an autopsy report for Mike to his parents, which is also weird. However, Mike's parents were able to get Mike's body to be embalmed and sent back to Germany for an autopsy there, as well as a burial. Clearly, something was up with the authorities in Malta, and an autopsy in Germany would surely reveal what had happened to Mike, except that despite the doctors saying they had embalmed the body, they just didn't. Mike's body had none of the chemicals used to keep the body from decomposing, so it decomposed. This made it nearly impossible to actually determine anything from what was left of his body. So what happened to Mike? Why were the police in Malta acting so weird and seemingly hiding evidence? Did Mike make it to the catacombs? Did a creepy evil catacomb creature steal his organs and the Maltese authorities covered it up by setting it up like an accidental fall? I don't know, I'm just throwing that out there. In all honesty, this sounds like some lazy authorities who had no leads on probably just a murder case, so they just threw out all the evidence so they didn't have to investigate anything. Or it could have been the catacomb monster thing I mentioned. Anyway, let me know your theories on what happened down in the comments, because it was so weird. That is such a weird story to read about. If you guys did enjoy, make sure to subscribe if you're new, but I'll see you all later. Bye-bye.